Okay, now we have our next great speaker is Brian Berry. Brian is a teacher, healer, counselor, clairvoyant, and trance channel who trained with Paul Solomon. Brian's history with the fellowship began in 1974 when Paul Solomon did a reading that saved the life of his infant son. In 1977, Brian became an ILC guide and traveled around the world sharing ILC and dream interpretation workshops. Originally a photojournalist, Brian was a special education teacher for 27 years with degrees in psychology and child development. He is the author of the book For Channels, Healers, and Helpers. And we have that here. And it would, hopefully some of you will, if you haven't already read it, it's a really great book. And I think you would really enjoy reading it. So please take a look at it and then buy it if you like. And Brian has done more than 400 trance readings for adults, children, each unique and all drawing on the Akashic record. And he teaches this material as well. We are really privileged to have Brian here as our speaker. Let's give him a great welcome.
Well, this will be quite different from the other presentations today, and very different from the kind of thing that I usually share when I come to the fellowship. I left the fellowship for a 10-year period after teaching ILC, and a number of things happened. The first one was that I had decided that I wanted to serve children, and I hadn't a clue how, but I did eventually figure that out. And so I earned those degrees that Sharon mentioned, and I became a school psychologist. I went into special education and worked almost exclusively with multi-handicapped preschoolers. I did that for 10 years in Connecticut and then moved to Florida with my wife, who had a good offer for a tenured college teaching spot in Florida. So I stepped back in time about 30 years. I won't go on about Florida and what that is like these days. But I want to make another and a simpler point. Paul Solomon always said, ILC will help you walk with your creator, will help you know that creator, and that will transform your life. Well, it did. When I first went into school psychology, I thought, I have been defeated. I should be going around the world, leading workshops and teaching people how to do miracles and draw closer to the creator. I really thought, if I get involved with the public school system, I'll just naturally be ground down into mediocrity. And if we have any special ed teachers here, you'll know what I mean. Well, that happened, but another thing happened too. I fell in love with those kids. And after I stopped doing the multi-handicapped preschoolers and went to Florida, they took one look at my qualifications and my record, and they said, we have just the population for you, and turned me over to thugs in minority middle schools. And that's what I did for 15 years in Florida. So my only qualification was a parade ground voice. That's all I had to bring to handling the thugs. But I thought, when it came time to end that, when it was my retirement time, I was sitting in my tiny little office and I was praying because, of course, I had fallen in love with those thugs. And they came before me in a procession. And I recognized them, because they were in uniform, as the very young man I had persuaded to join Hitler's army, most of whom died before Stalingrad in the snow. I had the opportunity to make right something, a great series of wrongs that I had done in my last life. And I said, have I done penance? And they said, no. You taught us that a state can be kind to its people. a lesson we needed to learn in order to come back to Earth. Well, that changed a number of things for me. Now, it was at that point that I began to do the readings. And yes, I have done more than 400 of them over the last 11 years. And that's been done in a different context, because not long after I retired, my wife on her bicycle was hit from behind by a driver in a van. And that put her in a wheelchair. She is a quadriplegic, but she continued to teach at Edgar College. And she has continued to do that all these years. And about 7 years ago, she began to teach human trafficking. And among the very first students that she taught was the person who now heads the United Nations Human Trafficking Office. And she trained quite a few people, mostly women, in that work. And in the course of it, she began to go to Cambodia. And I went with her. Was I teaching? No, I was the transport and safety officer. I handled the wheelchair on those wonderful rubble-covered Cambodian streets and navigated around the sidewalks that, of course, are always covered with motor scooters. So that was my job. I'm going back to Cambodia on the 28th of May for a month. Those trips are usually a month long. And we're doing something different this time. What we've always done is take a dozen students, traveled around and had them shadow and learn from the NGOs that rescue kids from trafficked situations and rehabilitate them. This time, we're going with only 4 students. We're going to do a research project. This has troubled us both for some years. None of the nations in Southeast Asia are very prosperous, and Cambodia is probably the least prosperous among them. But for whatever reason, the rate of trafficked children in Cambodia is 3 times that of its neighbors. Why? Another feature of that situation is many of those children are sold to the traffickers by their parents. That's very hard to understand. That is not the Buddhist way. That would be an understatement. So Nancy has put together a questionnaire, and we are going to interview young women, some of whom were trafficking victims, and most of whom are not, most of whom work for those NGOs. We're going to discover what those young women were taught about sexuality and sex, and what they were aiming for, and what they've hopefully learned from this situation. So we have our translator lined up. We've known him a long time, and we had the permission to speak to those young women, most of whom we've met in the course of our other visits to Cambodia. Our hope is, and our plan is, that we will write a paper and it will be published in the Asian Network Journal. So I have never done research. Nancy hasn't done much, and we do have some concerns about whether our, how can I say this, not very worldly young female undergraduates from Edgar College are going to handle this situation. They may find it a little stressful. So I'm going to do something different here. Rather than tell you stories of miracles, maybe I'll tell you next year. When we get back, I'm going to right now ask you to pray for us, Nancy and me and the young women who'll be doing the interviews. Pray that they'll come through this situation without scars. Pray that we'll do good work. And pray that the results of our research will be turned to good uses. So if you will, just for a few moments, I want you to picture us wheeling through the streets of Cambodia with the wheelchair and the 4 young women, and going into these agencies and going into the homes of these families. And you probably know that when these girls are rescued, they're not welcome back at their homes. They're seen as ruined. So we'll be working with them too. Nancy's major research question is, This breakdown in family values, can it be traced to the Pol Pot genocide in Cambodia, which was a terrible, terrible time for Cambodians? So we're going to be sticking our noses deep into the dark side of the human experience for some months. So I want you to see those homes, the young women we bring with us and the young women we're talking to. I want you to flood them with light and love them. I know some of these victims. They are wonderful young women and very, very courageous because they're making their way back into a society where they're not wanted. I want you to see them flooded with light, speaking up about their experience, turning it somehow into gold in their own lives. That's my real purpose. I won't have much contribution to make to this research paper. I don't have a PhD. It'll be all right, though. So we'll be out there for a month. Of course, it'll be hot. And of course, I will get discouraged. It's always hard. And I'll be honest with you. We don't stay in very good places. And even if we did, it wouldn't make much difference. I do worry before I go to Cambodia about Nancy's safety. And if you've worked with handicapped people, you will understand that the most dangerous place for us is not the street, it's the bathroom. To put it mildly, they are not ADA compliant. So every new bathroom is a new adventure, and that's what I worry about. So pray for me too, that I'll have the good balance and the strength to come through this with no injuries for her or for me. Now, that's a very short presentation, isn't it? And isn't that a welcome change for me? So I am grateful to you because I feel buoyed up by your prayers, and we'll spend 2 minutes in silence, and I'll breathe this blessing in. Thank you for your love, your prayers, and your support.